Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1213 in the middle of the page. And to sum up what we've learned, yesterday we learned that Gan Eden is the Gili of Vayivita Hashem Elikim, Havaya Elikim, the full name, not just Elikim, but also Havaya. So he calls that the Havaya of Atzilus, that Atzilus unfiltered radiates in Gan Eden. But Gan Eden is situated in Bria. Gan Eden Elyon in Bria, Gan Eden Atach Nasiya. So the question is, how can you have unfiltered Atzilus there when indeed when you get to Bria, you have to go, it goes through the Parsa, through a partition that causes it to have an Shel Tulda. The cannot be exactly as it was in its original state. It's in a diluted state, or Shel Tulda, as we explained, the of reflection of that comes from a secondary reflection from Atzilus. How is it possible that you could have Atzilus in Biyah through Gan Eden here? Unlike the rest of the world of Biyah, where there the concealment, of course, takes effect. The Eich Efsher, he says, Shanasham is the Biyah, that the souls of Biyah, should Yikablu Eira Atzilus, how could they receive this unfiltered energy from Atzilus to benefit from and enjoy the reflection of the Shekhinah without being overwhelmed or being annihilated and obliterated, since Atzilus is not being affected by the Tzimtzum in this case. In other words, the Havaya Lakim of Gan Eden. So now he began to explain that. He said, Yesh Lahagdim, let's preface going to discuss the verse Ani Rishon v'Ani Achron. Ani Rishon v'Ani Achron. I am at the beginning, I am the first, I am the last, and he explains that Ani Rishon he's referring to is before the whole Ishtalshlus, the divine that precedes the entire cosmic order, and it's only a source for Ishtalshlus. And Ani Achron is the end of Ishtalshlus. So basically, God is saying, I am at the beginning before it all, I'm at the end of it all. Essentially, that's what the verse says. Then he went to explain what's the difference between Rishon and Reishis. Ben Reishis l'Rishon. Because this verse says Rishon, not Reishis. So it says Reishis and Rishon. Reishis is Lashon Nekeva, so it's the makabel. It's a recipient. But it's still a Reishis, it's still a beginning. So he explains as the makabel within the mashpia. Within the mashpia itself, Rishon is Lashon Zachar. That's the masculine. That's the mashpia of the mashpia. And Reishis, he says, is that in the mashpia itself is how he relates to the makabel, how he's bekiruv and shaykhis el hadover shalamatim imen. Right, that he relates to and is closer to the recipient. And as I explained, the mashpia as he is for himself, he's still a mashpia, but he's somewhat removed from the recipient. And then there's how he relates to the recipient. Yeah. And Rishon is b'bchinas havdalah. He's in a state of being removed, aloof, or removed from that process. Then he brought from Rashi, where Rashi says, whenever it says Reishis b'mikra ein adavik l'teva she'en l'cha Reishis b'mikra she'en adavik l'teva shachrel. When it says Reishis, it always means it's connected to the next word. And in contrast to Bereshena. So the Shena is more like Rishon. And Reishis is it relates to the levels afterwards. That means that Reishis is connected to with Achrus, which comes afterwards, or even till the end, and they are commensurate to one another. Rishon, on the other hand, Rishon who shemoved l'adayim min Reishis va'Achrus. Rishon is a higher state. It's also first. Rishon means first, but it's a first that's removed relatively from Reishis and Achrus. And I gave the example of Rosh Hashanah. In other words, you could have a Rishon that is the beginning, but it's removed. And then you have a beginning that's actually part of the process. Now he's going to explain what this means in Spheris. That's the concept. That's the definition of the words. What levels is this referring to? So he says this is the difference. This is B'chinas Keser v'Chochma. So I'm continuing to read inside on page 1213. The line begins, Hu shemuv the ladai. This is Keser and Chochma. In other words, Keser is going to be Rishon and Chochma is going to be Reishis. The Chochma nikra Reishis. Chochma is called Reishis. K'mesher Kosav, v'Reishis Chochma. Says Reishis Chochma. Reishis Chochma, Yiras Hashem. The word Reishis Chochma. So Reishis is Chochma. It's also a beginning. Reishis means the beginning of something. But that's Chochma. Shehi Reishis Hishtalshlus. Because that's the head and the beginning of Hishtalshlus, the order, the cosmic order. Ubebchinas Kiruv Dveikus Behem. And it's in a state of close and a connected with, like using Rashi's letter, Dovuk, that it's attached or connected with that which comes afterwards. So Chochma is the first of the 10 spheres. Everything comes, Kulam b'Chochma sis, everything comes from Chochma. And yet, Chochma is part of the Esser-spheres. It's the first. So it's close and relates to them, and it's a direct source for everything that comes afterwards. And it's actually connected. In other words, when you have Reishis, it indicates that there's something that comes afterwards. Pelech Harimin is a Kabbalistic sefer from the Rameh Mipanoi. So there's a great Kabbalist, Rameh Mipanoi, who was a student of the, well, he's a commentary on the Ramak, Ramesha Kadavira. So he has a Pelech Harimin, that's the name of his sefer and his commentary.
He's a commentary, but not a student, right?
He was an Italian Mekubal. I think he was a student more from the Yisrael Sarug, maybe. I'm not sure, not really. I'm not sure he was a Talmud, but he's definitely a commentary on the Ramak. He wrote the famous Sefer Asar Mamoris. This is Rameh Mipanoi. Yeah. Panoi is a city. So he writes like this. So what does he write in this context? Sha'chochme mispashetes b'sviris kitipa min hameach. That Chochma extends into the spheres like tipa min hameach, like the drop of seed, of semen, that ultimately gives birth and conceives, that originates in the mayach, and I'll explain that in a minute. Ketipa min hamayach, hamishtal shelish, that evolves, v'nasim gelam l'chol havayas animshachis b'mena, which evolves, and from that will become the form for all the things that will come into being that extend from there, from the mayach. So let's just explain that. Actually, just teaching this in Tanya, Ayin Beis. So this is Tanya. He says this. He says that a neshama is like a ketipa memeich ha'av. So kemoy haben shenimshach metipa memeich ha'av. So it should be anyway clarified that tipa memeich ha'av is not like some think or some used to think that actually the actual physical semen that becomes the seed originates in the mind. The Alter Rebbe makes it very clear in Tereir that it cannot be physical, it means spiritual. It means that essentially it's carrying the DNA. The mind is the source of everything in life, in the human being. And someone pointed out to me, I'll talk about it, Mitzvah Shabbos, the pituitary gland is actually a gland at the base of the spine.
Pituitary.
Pituitary. How do you pronounce it?
Pituitary.
Pituitary. Okay. So it's a gland that's right at the top of the spine, at the base of the brain, and it actually controls different hormones, including the reproductive organs and so on. So the idea here is not that it's necessarily physical; it's a matter of the mind being. The mind is carried over, and ultimately evolves until it becomes a physical seed that will carry all the genetic material of the mind and the brain, that becomes the seed that will fertilize the egg and conceive a child.
People nimshach,
yes. So nimshach, I'm saying,
pituitary is not on top of the spine in the back; it's more in the front, and that's why people who get tumors it's near the
It's behind, I think, the base of the nose, right?
Yeah, that's the difference when you point it out in the back, it's not there, yeah.
No, I meant in the back because the spine is in the back.
Yeah.
I meant it's at the top of the spine. It's in the
Right.
lower.
Right,
Yeah.
it's in the front. It's more in the front. That's why people who get adenomas here and stuff like that get problems with the eyes because the eyes bypass it after, So it's right in the front. It's known to everybody.
Okay, so
you want to say it's going to the face and from the face to the back? I thought it's going directly to.
No, it doesn't go. It does go. It goes directly, but it's near the optic chiasma in the front. So that's why the pituitary is not in the back. That's all I tell you. The hindbrain is a whole different thing. There's all of this and that, but it's not.
It's at the bottom of what I understand. It's at the bottom. It's by the stem, the top of the stem of the spinal cord where it meets the brain, right beneath, but behind the bridge of the nose.
Yeah. There's two. Yeah, he said two completely different places. You just mentioned the one breath.
I never. Okay, fine. Anyway, continuing on.
But it's very close to the moyach. Okay, the moyach itself.
Okay, so let me continue. Can we continue? Because people are in the class. Let's not. Can we continue learning? Okay, let's continue learning. So it goes like this.
But Simon,
just as we have the physical sense. Can I continue teaching? Hello.
Could you tell me where is it in Torah oil? You know?
Yeah, in Torah Chayesar. Yeah. Okay. So now, as we continue on, so it's like this. The Rameh compares and says, just as the mind, which of course is like the central nervous system and carries all the genetic material that travels and ultimately becomes the seed, which will then turn into the very, like I said, the Gelam, the Kol Havoyas, which means will become, what did I have translate Gelam before? Become the shape, the matter, the actual matter of everything that comes into being. The Rebbe actually adds in the letter that it says, Ein kishe el ladas, that you cannot actually emit seed unless there's das, concentration. That means the mind is part of the process, that you need to have a concentrated mind effort to be able to produce the seed. So all that, so the way it is in Gashmi is the same as in Ruchnis. That the Chochma of Atzilus, or I don't know if he calls it Atzilus, he says Chochma is Reishis and Rishon, is mispashetes b'spheres, extends into the spheres. So there are really two steps here, even though it doesn't talk about step two. But the first is that the very conception begins with Chochma, and that extends, like the seed extends, and ultimately gives substance to everything in existence, in this the creation of a child, of a life. The second point we know is also that the mind is the central nervous system. It controls everything. So Chochma plays a key role. It's Reishis, but it's also mispashetes b'spheres, means it's engaged with everything that follows it. That's why Reishis is connected with that which comes, that follows the Reishis. That's what he wants to say. Okay, the Hare Chochma, he gamkin l'mayla mekol ha-spheres. The Chochma is also above all the spheres. Besides the fact that it extends into the spheres, it's also above them. It's of a different quality. B'bchinas havdolas hamayla. In a way that it's like of a different quality. It's separate qualitatively from the rest of the spheres. So Chochma has two parts to it. One is that as it relates to the spheres and extends into them, but there's a part of it that is also removed. U'kamoishin is bar le'il, like we learned earlier, Dibra Maskal at Acha Sha'alti. Acha Sha'alti in volume 2, he says, by page 1116. The Ayin, how do you pronounce that? Apirion? Ma'atzei halavonon.
Aperion.
Yeah, apirion ma'atzeh levanon. So we learned there, if I recall correctly, let me look. There he talked about that all shapes and forms originate. Apirion, I believe, is like a slate. Let me see. Yeah, I remember learning it. You know the translation of apirion?
I think aperion is like a chuppah, something which is
Yeah, it says like this: apirion osoloi hamelach shlema ma'atzeh halavonin. That Shlema built for him an apirion. It could be a canopy from the Atzeh Lebanon, from the cedars, from the trees of the cedar trees of Lebanon. So he says that's the leaven. Lebanon is Chochma, Lavan, and Bina is a Shiur, is shape. So you create all the shapes come from the blank slate or the colorless color of white. Yeah. So all the colors like red, green, black, you paint them on. If you don't have a white background, you can't have all these colors. So basically, Chochma is the base from which all the colors emerge. That's what he says there. Yeah.
There is a mentioning white.
Levanon is from the word white. Yeah. So now upon him, that all the shapes are from the Nekuda of Chochma. So Chochma is like a removed, because Chochma doesn't have a color, it's white, but because of the whiteness, all other colors can emerge. Now he doesn't use the example there of a crystal, like for example, the fact that everything in a prism, where all the colors originate from the color white, there he's talking more. He explained that the white is like the map. Before you actually start painting a map or drawing a map, you need to have a white background. That's the basically, he elaborates there. But bottom line is that Chochma has two parts to it. One part that it extends into all the spheres, another part that it's removed, but it's the beginning and the root of all the spheres. Okay. Umakol mokim, and yet, even though Chochma is removed to some extent, harizeh b'bchinas er pnimi, it's still Chochma, it's not a makif. It's still an immanent energy, a very specific immanent energy, ub'bchinas erech el kol haspheres. Shidvuku miyuchedes in kulam. And it's in the state of, it's relatively connected with. There's something commensurate between Chochma and all the spheres. Shidvuku miyuchedes in kulam, because it's attached with and united with them all. So he said here that Chochma does have an element that it's removed, but it also has an element that is connected. So even the part that's removed is still pnimi. It's just in the pnimi itself, which makes sense. Like if you think of the mind of a human being, which controls the whole person. So on one hand, the mind is very active in every part of the body. It's constantly connected through the nervous system and the spinal and everything to the human being. In the creation process, in the conception process, the mind, which forms and shapes the DNA, the DNA and the genetic material that goes through, that becomes the seed that will ultimately give shape to everything. On the other hand, the mind is also, if you think about it, removed. The mind is superior to all the other faculties. It's not one of them. And yes, it's one of the faculties. Let me correct that. But it's of a different quality. So while it's also interacting with, and it's a pnimi, the mind is not a makif. It's not outside of the human being. So on one hand, it serves as like a central nervous system, but it's also central in the sense that it has some qualities that are beyond and above the other faculties. So it's connected, but in a way that's above. Okay, that's Chochma. The be'emes, now the Rebbe Rashab qualifies some of this in a parentheses. So let's read the parentheses. The be'emes begins ha-chochmeh. The truth is, if you go dig deeper, chochmeh, as we have learned, he masha ein sof atzmus umuhus atzuma, which is ein sof atzmus umuhus simtsum atzmei kavyachol u'ba'ob b'eifin kazel is be'erach kol asfiris. That we learned, and this is like earlier, that chochmeh is more than that. What we just discussed is chochmeh in its operational level. So chochmeh is a reishis. It's connected and extends into all the faculties and to the whole being of the person, but it's still removed. But where does chochmah originate from? Why is chochmah taka that way? Because in truth, chochmah is Ein Sof that packaged itself and turned itself into a chochmah. So he says, he diminished himself, so to speak, and comes in a way that it should be be'erach kol asfiris. In other words, chochmah, in its real deeper level, is actually godliness, the infinite divine, or that concentrated itself, that it should come into the world of spheres. V'gam kol hanivraim, and also all the creations.
He's not talking about Atzmos.
One second. I need to stop. I'm not. We're learning. People are telling me
I want to understand what you said.
We all want to understand, and that's why I'm here to explain. So please wait till I finish, and then I'll take questions. Okay. So what we have here is like this. That chochmah is not just another sphere. It's actually where the divine bridges. The divine created a bridge to the spheres. And that's what chochmah is, lisachid ulizdabik imam, in order to unite and connect with them. V'zehu madregas ha-chochmah. And this is actually the level of chochmah. And I'm going to explain right now. This is a theme that has been recurrent in Ayin Beis quite a few times, because this is a critical piece of the mamutza, the interface between higher than chochmah, keser, and Ein Sof, that's higher levels, and the immanent energy. Remember, the question was, where's bli gvul meet gvul? Where's the infinite meet the finite? Where does rotzen, which is keser, meet the keiches pnimim, the internal faculties, which was the major theme in volume 1, and continues to be a theme, because it's all part of the process of us, the interface of connecting keser, aremimcha, elakaya melech. So in a number of places in Ayin Beis, the Rebbe Rashab explained it quite extensively. I'm just going to give you a summation of a few key points. And the point is that the truth is, from we go from the bottom up, we begin with our life and our existence, and you work your way up, you work your way all the way to the states of higher levels of the divine. That's mamata l'mayla. So we start from our existence. We come to understand that there's something that put us here. And we go up, we go level, Malchus, Zah, Bina, Chochmah. These are higher levels than us. Till we understand that there's the divine as it relates to existence, through Malchus, through Biyah, through Malchus of Atzilus. Then there's the divine that relates as Zah, the Midas of Hashem, and the Meichin of Hashem, which is, of course, a very high level. Then we go even further to Ratzon Hashem and so on. But from God's point of view, it goes the exact opposite. There were no spheres. There were no worlds. So you're dealing with a level of atzmus, tachlis hapshitus, utterly seamless, undefined. And then God wanted to use his Eir HaGvul and Koyach HaGvul to create, to define, to manifest godliness in a form of structure. So Chochmah is the first place where beyond structure meets structure. So Chochmah faces Keser, but also faces all the spheres. That's its true personality. To put it in simpler terms, the Rabbi Rashab used in volume 1 an expression that Chochmah is really Tainug, but it's packaged in the form of intelligence. So let me explain that. And he gave the whole example with building a home and so on. That is the pleasure that you have from it, and that's why the pleasure translates into a wisdom. the fact that we are able to have, with the fact that we have minds, that we have a mind, and we're starting with Chochma, the ability to imagine a reality beyond us allows the mortal, limited human being to connect to something beyond mortality. If we were just Bali Midas, if we were just emotional creatures without any minds, then we would be like the animal kingdom. Our minds would be only there to help us survive, to hunt, to feed, to breed, to protect, etc. The fact that we were given a mind gives the human being the ability to imagine, to dream, to conceive of things that are beyond us. So emotionally, we may be very limited, but our minds can learn Chassidus. We can learn Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum, regardless of how well we understand it. But our minds can think about it, and we can try to understand, and we get something. This is a gift because Elikus, basically, it's not that Chassidus Chabad is about understanding God. It's that godliness is so powerful that God found a way to manifest even in intelligence. And he gave us intelligence in order to experience God in a way that we can contain it. If it was just with Amunah and faith, or Ru'usa Deliba, because it says, Les machshavet tfisa beklal, Elo, the toughest, Ru'usa Deliba, which means the desire of the heart, then we would not have an internal connection with God. We'd have a connection through makif. In other words, our logic and our reason reaches a ceiling, and then you need faith to go higher. But now the fact that godliness packaged himself, so to speak, like he says here, that he was mitzamtzim himself and put himself into a package called intelligence, we may call it intelligence, but in truth it's a tool to serve as a bridge from a very egocentric and confined consciousness to experience a consciousness that's higher than us, a higher state of consciousness. Now, the true higher state of consciousness, we're talking about super consciousness, Chochma Stima, and the different levels that we learned about that. But the bridge between the conscious human being and the super conscious and beyond is Chochma. So Chochma that's why it comes like a drop, like sparks. It's not really Bina, where it's fully developed as we learned. So in it radiates a very deep truth, a resonating truth. Riya, we learned. Riya, it's like seeing something with your mind. Resonating truth. So Chochma really is not about understanding, it's about experiencing a higher truth. And that's why Chochma, because it's bittul, and we don't really have it's not really, we don't really have handles to hold on to it. It's just the mere spark of an idea. It carries, like the Alter Rebbe says in Perik Lamed Hey, in the Hagah, Hu levade ve'ein zulase, that the Ein Sof, that only him and nothing else, Chochma is a container for that. So now we have something that on one hand looks like intelligence, but in truth, it's something beyond intelligence. It's about a higher truth. So Chochma is this what I just said is a summation of quite a few different Maimorim that the Rebbe Rashab explained earlier. So now in this parenthesis, he's saying, we just said Chochma is Reishis. In truth, Chochma comes from a much deeper level, but God wanted to manifest it in a Reishis because he wanted a bridge between the rest of the spheres, the structure of existence, and that's why he brings, most likely from the Apirian, because he wants colors, but he wants the colors of existence, the colors which are the shapes and definition of existence, to relate and originate to Chochma. So Chochma becomes a Reishis, which is somewhat removed, but still in the Pnimi. But in truth, it's originating from Ein Sof, like we just learned. And that's where Chochma is, that interface between beyond structure, beyond consciousness and consciousness. Okay? This is all in the parentheses because it's not really the essential theme he wants to address here. Here he wants to talk about Reishis. But once he's talking about it, he wanted to make sure that it qualify what Chochma actually is. So basically, Chochma is God's tool that he uses to take the Ein Sof, package it in a Pnimi, in a faculty that can identify and relate to the other faculties. So Chochma, on one hand, has very deep, resonating higher truths. On the other hand, Chochma can travel into Bina and into the rest of the spheres, as we just learned. Okay.
Do we ask now questions?
Yeah, go ahead. You want to ask something? Go ahead.
I have two things. One thing is, you said correctly that the Uso de Liber is not involving Chochma, and that's why there is Chesaron, but Chochma is reaching much higher. But I think I remember that we learned that there is a point that Chochma is not reaching anymore, and Uso de Liber is reaching. So the way that I understand it, tell me if I'm correct, that you need the Chochma to reach the highest because this is making you in Pnimius. But then you come into a point that with Chochma you cannot go. After the Chochma, when you have the Rusa de Liber, that's how you're reaching Hashem. I'm correct? I think that we learned that.
Different places explains it in different ways. In context of what we're learning right now, I equated Rusa de Liber with Amunah and faith, even though it's not exactly Amunah. But the point I wanted to make was that Chochma is a internal faculty. The Rusa de Liber is not. And it's an internal faculty that is the beginning of the process of cognition and the cognitive process. So on one hand, yes, that's what I wanted to emphasize here.
Okay, another thing, all of this thing that you said just now, he said, that does not mean Atzmus, right?
Generally speaking, it's higher levels that are beyond structure. You know, you mean Atzmus, like built in Mitzias Nimtza, Atzmus?
Yeah. Maybe yes, somehow, because this other.
I wouldn't say that because before Chochma, there's Keser. You can't really say that because that's, it's talking about all the levels that are higher than, let's call it the structure of Ishtalshlus. Ein Sof, it does say Ein Sof, it doesn't say Atzmus.
He said,
if he wanted to say,
you're talking Chochma some more,
he
right?
wouldn't say Ein Sof then. He would say, Masha Atzmus Mehusa Tzimtzum Atzmei, because there's no Tzimtzum in Atzmus. So he means Etzem Ha'oyer, B'kitzur. That's clear.
You're talking now about Chochma some more, or are you talking about regular?
He's talking about Chochma Gluya, Chochma in general. Chochma in general. I broke it down, but he's not breaking it down. It's Chochma in general, which goes through all the levels. Anyway, when he says Ein Sof Atzmus Mahus, he means the Ein Sof of Atzmus Mahus. Okay. So now he says like this. So there's a mashal for this that the Rebbe Shabbos brought earlier in Ayin Beis as well. In Medrash Shabbos, a mashal for the Mishkan, where we talk about that in the Shachanti B'Seichem. How could you say that Atzmus, that the highest levels that are beyond structure, can manifest in the Shachanti B'Seichem in the structure? In the words of Shlomo HaMelech, Shemayim v'shemei Shemayim lo yichal kolucha. Heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain you. Afki abayis hazeh. How could a simple small house like this contain you when all the heavens can't contain? So the Medrash Shabbos says like this. The Medrash goes Maris Gdelus or Maris Ktanis Hamavur b'Lekutei Torah Dibra Maskul Vayikach Cherach. So there the example is that when you have, let's say, a sun shining, and you have different mirrors. You can have a large mirror and a small mirror. They both are going to reflect the same sun. So even though the sun may be beyond any type of level, but each mirror will reflect it. So you could also have a small mirror, just like the Rebbe often brings this, one drop of water reflects the entire sun, just like the entire Pacific or Atlantic Ocean. So it doesn't change the sun. The sun has manifested itself in a way that can be reflected in one drop. That's what he's saying. That Ein Sof Atzmus Mahus, the essence of the Eir, now is manifest, like he says. Ein Sof HaMislabish B'Chochma. So really, it's Ein Sof. It's like the whole Ein Sof, but it's Mislabish now in Chochma. So you're seeing it through the lens of Chochma. Okay. K'moy Kain, hu b'chochma be'etzem mahusa. And same as Chochma in its coarse essence. What is Chochma? Shezo b'chinas atzmus Ein Sof Baruch Hu. It's really the core of Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Shebo b'efen kazeh liyas b'hasagas hanimtzayim. That is manifested in a way that we can have hasagas hanimtzayim, existence can have some hasaga in Ein Sof. God wanted us to have some comprehension, so He gave us a mind, and He created a chochmah, and in it He manifested Himself, and that is essentially what chochmah truly is. It says, look in volume 1, page 411. If I remember correctly, that's what I was quoting before. I'm just looking inside. It's somewhat a little, I'm not going to say exactly because Torah is on a higher level, but when we say non nafshis ksavis yahavis, that anoichi, that God, it says, what's anoichi is acronym for I having written myself, giving you my nafshis, my nefesh in these words. Like oisi atam leichim. But you'll say, what do you mean? God is beyond any words, beyond any structure. But God has taken His etzem and put it in. But it's different than this because that's Torah. Here He's talking about Chochmah in general. So what does He say on Tov Yud Aleph? Yeah. The Tainug, Chochmah is Tainug. That's exactly what He says here. Hu Tainug Atzmei Nasa Chochmah. Like Primis Atik, Primis Abba, Primis Atik. Yeah.
Between Atik and Arik and Atik, we learned, right?
That's Moiches Tamor. We're not talking about Chochmas Tamor now. We're talking now about Chochmah Gluya and Atzilus, the sphere. The sphere of Chochmah as it stands at Pnimi. Okay. So that's Chochmah. So Chochmah really, the parentheses has added a very powerful dimension. That Chochmah is a bridge between the Ein Sof, and the spheres. But once it becomes a bridge, it's a level of Reishis Chochmah, which on one hand is removed, but on the other hand extends to and relates to existence. That's why our mind is similar. The human mind, on one hand, is beyond the rest of the body, the rest of the faculties. On the other hand, it engages with and controls and expresses itself through all the faculties. That's Chochmah. Any questions on this? Because we're going to move now to Keser. No questions?
Is Chochmah also called Rishon, or in addition to Reishis, Chochmah?
Right now, he only called it Reishis. It looks like Rishon is going to be Keser, but let's see. Right now, he called Chochmah Reishis, not Rishon. Aval HaKeser. However, Keser, even though it's the Rishon L'Netzolim, it means that the beginning is the first of all emanations is Keser. Ein a dovek imam. It's not attached. It's not connected with them. It's removed from them. It's in a state of removed from them, beyond. And this is called Rishon. V'loy Reishis, and not Reishis. So clearly, Chochmah is Reishis, and Keser is Rishon. She'einu b'chinas makabel, because it doesn't have that feminine makabel element. What is it? It's that which was emanated and emitted from Ein Sof Baruch Hu to be the Rishon, the first of all the emanations. So in the context of Mashpia Makabel, is the Mashpia, the first Mashpia that God created, so to speak, in Ishtalshlus, is Keser. Then comes the level of Chochmah, which receives from Keser, and that's a Mashpia that also has the Makabel within it, meaning it relates to the recipient. So there's Mashpia as he is in himself, and there's Mashpia as he relates to his student or his recipient. And that's the difference between Rishon and Reishis. Now remember, in this process of interfaces, every step is crucial. You don't jump steps. So if you want to reflect, if you want to express godliness, pure godliness, that's Keser.
That's
Relatively
Mashpia.
speaking. One second. Let me finish explaining. When you want to express godliness in its purest form, I'm not talking about purest in Atzmos right now. I'm talking about not affected by existence. Remember, we're talking about Eir, for example, Eir HaBlikvul. The Eir that all it's doing is expressing what God is like. That's Keser. If you want to have God as it relates to existence, so we can relate to it more, we can understand it, and we can appreciate it, that's Chochma. And that continues to spread into the rest of the spheres. So in the words we learned earlier, Keser would be like the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti, and Chochma would be like the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. We actually learned that. And then there's many other levels of that, but generally speaking, that's Rishon and Reishis. So we have now steps. Remember, we've learned all the time that why do we need ishtalshlus to be stepping stones? So God, we understand how God created existence in a structured way. And we have stepping stones like a ladder that we can climb without jumping. We can climb in an organized fashion, step by step, and internalize. Key word here is internalize the divine, because we have, let's say, the teacher as he relates to me as a student. And then I want to know what the teacher is like on his own without me as a student. You know, sometimes you want to see the Rebbe as he relates to you. Sometimes you want to know what the Rebbe is like on his own, so to speak. So in other words, there are levels, and now we're talking about those two levels of Rishon and Reishis. We'll soon learn how it's related to Gan Eden and so on. But if you think about it, this is all the central themes of Ayin Beis all the time. This is discussed literally hundreds of different ways that this has been discussed over the pages we've learned, the 1,213 pages we've learned till here. In the first volume, big time, we talked about Ratzon and the Koiches. So basically, it's all about experiencing godliness. But the question is, on whose terms and how much does it relate to us? So if you think about it, the truth is we need much lower than Chochma. We need Malchus of Atzilus to go through a parsa, a partition, and come to Biyah all the way down to the lowest levels. If we're talking about us. But if you're talking about the bigger picture, Chochma represents basically a likus as it manifests in Ishtalshlus, and Keser represents a likus that's higher than Ishtalshlus, meaning higher than the structure. So it's the first emanation, but it's not in a state of connected to the Makabel directly. Through Chochma, it will begin to flow that way. So that's the difference between Chochma and Keser, Reishis and Rishon. Okay?
Is it correct to say that Rishon is not, it's an entity, it's an etzor, but not a mashpia? Reishis is a mashpia.
No, he said Rishon is a mashpia, Lashon Zachar. He called it a mashpia that does not have the, but it's removed from the makabel. So it's not correct to say that. He said it clearly. He said Rishon, he says Rishon hu mashpia. B'bchinas havdolah. Actually, he said the word Mokar HaMashpia, if you want to be accurate. Mokar HaMashpia. He said Mokar of the Mashpia. But here, he's saying it's not Makabel, his Rishons and so on. Okay. So you could call Mokar HaMashpia if you wish, if you don't want to use the word Mashpia. I think it depends how you explain Keser. I mean, end of the day, Keser is going to be Mashpia into Chochma and to Atzilus. It's just in a removed way. So you can't say it's not a mashpia at all.
Yeah, that's why it's called Rishon. Rishon means it's a beginning.
Yeah, but right, exactly. So, and Rishon Lashon Zachar. So he calls it Mokar HaMashpia earlier, but you could call it a mashpia just like b'bchinas kiruv, like a mashpia who's didn't yet apply himself to the student, but he's still the etzem rav and a mashpia. Okay. So now he says like this. Oh, what's that? Maybe we should stop here. So he says he's going to call now. Now he's going to compare this to Ratzon, which of course is the level of Keser. But let me just see something. 1 second. I think we should stop here. I'm going to stop here because this starts now explanation of how this relates to Ratzon as opposed to Chochma, and he's going to continue to explain this. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop here close to the bottom of page 1213. Does anybody have any questions? Want to clarify anything?
Yeah. It's saying Chachma is hashpah based on a feedback, maybe, and
No. Nothing like that stated here at all. There's no feedback here altogether. It's talking about Chochma is a mashpia that he gave all kinds of examples. The tipa, Chochma as a mashpia that relates to the makabel. Doesn't say about feedback. He's not talking about Chochma receiving anything. If you want to say why Chochma Reishis is called makabel, he explained. Look at the line. He says like this. He says, "V'ima yez the Reishis u'gamke Reishis lezedover as a gamke b'chinas mashpia. Hine liyas the Reishis u'b'chinas makabel al kain gam bezeh shu mashpia u'b'chinas kiru u'b'chinas shaychas ala makabel el adover shalamatim menu." So he's relating to the student. If that will ultimately lead to the fact that the student will ask questions mit talmidei yeshem mekulam, yeah, no problem. But that's not what he's discussing here. He's discussing Chochma as a Reishis that relates to the makabel. But he's not discussing per se how the makabel is giving feedback to the Chochma. Even though it's correct to say that the makabel does that. But that's not the context here.
In Reishis, not the Chochma itself is the makabel. There is a makabel. The Chochma itself is not a makabel.
Well, why don't you read the words that he said instead of us guessing? He says clearly. Why is it called Reishis? He says he read inside. But he said because it's also makabel. Hu b'chinas makabel. Okay, gam b'zeh mashpia.
Why? That's why I understood, because a makabel is more. But why is he himself a makabel?
Why don't you just read it? Because it's relating to the makabel, so it itself has a makabel. Shebe mashpia. Let's put it that way.
I'm just sort of trying to understand what it means that he's relating.
What means?
With his makabel, what is the Chochma makabel?
I just said to you, there's a thing called the makabel shebe mashpia. In the mashpia, he's already relating himself. He says he's relating to the recipient. That's called the makabel within the mashpia.
So he in a sense, there's some type of feedback there that he knows, like, to give to the makabel.
Maybe there's no feedback. No, if the teacher has now gotten to a mode where he's going to relate to his recipient. The teacher is coming down a level. Instead of just being a mashpia and he's not relating to the students, he's coming down a level and he's relating to these students. And that's why it's called Reishis. Remember, it's Reishis. It's not makabel. It's Reishis. But Reishis is in the state of relating to the makabel. That's how I understand what he says here.
I have a question. Let me ask you something. Since we could use Reishit as first verse of the Torah, maybe a little bit, just like a different perspective, that Bechachma bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
What did you say? I'm not understanding.
Oh, you just said that Reishit and Chachma are interchangeable. Basically, Reishit is Chachma. So can we understand the first verse of the Torah? Reishit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, but Bechachma Elohim. You see what I'm saying? Bechachma bara Elokim.
The Targum says Bereishis is bechuchmasa, just for the record.
Okay.
It says that in Targum. And he brought it from Rashi. Yeah. So Chochma is a Reishis, and it's a Reishis meaning it's associating with, connected with, related with the makabel, with the that which comes afterwards. And he called that Reishis. He says, Gam bezeh shu mashpia u'b'chinas kiruv u'b'chinas shaychus el adover shalamatim mimenu. I mean, I don't think he's into. You could say Chochma is a makabel from Keser. That you could say. I don't know if that he means that. Now that I'm reading it again, makabel. Yeah, but that would not help us here, because here Chochma is moving closer to the ones that come after him. Anyway, that's how I understand it. I am not contradicting, I said again, the fact that a makabel that there's feedback. That's not, I don't think it's what he means here, because he doesn't anyway hint to it anywhere. Okay.